bowl of ceremonial tea served from the heart. The aim of the Japanese tea ceremony is to create a profound bond between the participants. The tea implements are carefully selected and laid out. Every tiny aspect of the tea room has been arranged with the utmost care. A hanging scroll in the alcove expresses a theme related to the tea ceremony. It's complemented by a seasonal flower arrangement. The tea ceremony as it's known today was developed by the 16th century tea master Sen no Rikyu. He stressed the importance of offering sincere and heartfelt hospitality to all guests, regardless of status or rank. A radical new style of tea gathering, but still in the same spirit. The value that Rikyu placed on human connections is still honored to this day. By learning the practice of the tea ceremony, children develop a capacity to express consideration for others. On this edition of Begin Japanology, we explore the essentials of the tea ceremony, looking at its development and the place it holds in Japanese culture.
Hello and welcome to Begin Japanology. I'm Peter Barakan. Today we're going to be taking a look at the rather rarefied world of the tea ceremony. Tea, of course, is enjoyed around the world. There are many different types of tea, prepared and served in a variety of different ways. The kind of tea that's used in the tea ceremony is a powdered form of green tea, which is called matcha. Matcha is made from the sprouting buds of the tea plant, which are then dried and ground into a fine powder. To serve it, hot water is poured over the powder and it's then whisked until it becomes frothy. It's been said that the Japanese have elevated the act of preparing, serving and drinking tea into an art form in its own right. However, the tea ceremony is not just about enjoying the taste of the tea. There's a strong philosophical element to it as well, and the most important aspect is the spirit in which the host welcomes the guests. Elaborate preparations take place, from the layout of the tea garden to the tea room itself, also the choice of the tea implements, the decorative hanging scroll, the flower arrangement, even the food or sweets that are served with the tea. And in each of these aspects, form and etiquette have been further refined over the centuries, each becoming a sort of mini art form in itself, although as part of the tea ceremony. So you could say that the tea ceremony is the mother of all Japanese art forms. First, let's take a look at the variety of different types of tea ceremony that are held at different times of the year.
Throughout the year, tea ceremony gatherings are held to mark and reflect the changing seasons. At the start of the year, each major tea school holds a special event known as Hatsugama to celebrate the new year. The tea masters, students and acquaintances are invited to participate. It's an auspicious and festive occasion. In early spring, when the ume plum trees are in blossom, a festival takes place at the Kitano Tenmangu shrine in Kyoto. In the observances, which have been held since ancient times, offerings of blossom are presented to the deity of the shrine. As part of the ritual, a tea gathering is conducted at which tea is served to visitors by local geisha. This well-known tea ceremony event is a much-loved spring tradition in Kyoto. In autumn, the Hama Rikyu Garden in Tokyo is the venue for Nodate, an outdoor tea gathering. The experience of sipping hot matcha tea in the crisp autumn air is inspiring. The full moon of early autumn has long been considered the most beautiful of the year. At Kairakuen, a famous garden in Ibaraki, visitors sip tea while listening to traditional court music and gazing at the moon above them. Saidaiji Temple in Nara holds a tea gathering with a big difference. This ritual, called O-chamori, dates back to the 13th century. The tea is served in massive bowls 30 centimeters in diameter and weighing 5 kilograms, which are passed around for participants to drink from. In the old days, the head priest would make offerings of tea to the Buddha, which would then be passed around among the local congregation. That is how the ritual started. The practice of the tea ceremony is spreading around the world. At the Musée Guimet in Paris, an authentic tea room has been constructed where visitors are given a taste of the tea ceremony. Japanese-style tea gatherings like this are now being held in many other countries.
As you've just seen, tea gatherings can take a number of different forms, but a formal, full-scale tea ceremony will last about 4 hours. The time of day that a tea ceremony is held will vary depending on the purpose, who's going to be there, and also the time of year. Generally speaking, they start at noon, but in the summer, when it can get very hot and humid, tea gatherings can start as early as 6 o'clock in the morning. Conversely, for people who go out to work, recently there are tea gatherings also held in the evenings. Next, let's take a look at exactly what happens during the course of a tea ceremony.
At a traditional tea ceremony, guests first pass through a formal garden to reach the tea house. Before entering, they pause at a shelter fitted with a bench. Enjoying the view of the garden, they put themselves in the right frame of mind for the tea ceremony ahead. The garden evokes a rustic scene of nature with few colourful flowers. It's a setting intended to soothe the spirit. As they walk through the garden, the guests reach the tsukubai, a stone bowl with a hollow carved into it, which is filled with water. This water is used for washing the hands and rinsing the mouth, a symbolic ritual of purification before the ceremony. The tea house will have only a very narrow entrance. This is called the Nijiri-guchi. The host doesn't greet the guests yet, but the room has been carefully prepared. There's a decorative scroll hanging in the tokonoma alcove. On this one, the calligraphy reads, "Intoxicated by ume plum blossom." It's a poetic allusion to the season, early spring. Next to the scroll is a small vase holding a sprig of ume blossom. These decorations are understated, yet composed with great deliberation. The implements used for serving the tea are a crucial element in the tea ceremony. Most tea gatherings have a theme, and the implements are chosen accordingly. The guests appreciate the tea implements selected by the host. Before the tea is prepared, sweet confections are served to the guests. As with the decoration of the room, they often evoke the season. Tasting this morsel of sweetness before drinking the tea serves to accentuate the mild bitterness of the tea itself. Finally, the host prepares the tea and serves it to the guests. The specific actions performed in preparing the tea are known as temae. They're precisely defined to achieve great elegance with only the subtlest of movements. The matcha is taken from the tea caddy using a bamboo scoop. The amount is carefully measured, so there will be 3 scoops of tea in the bowl for each of the guests. Water has been heated up in the kettle. This is ladled over the tea in the bowl. The elegance with which each of these actions is performed is one of the ways for the host to demonstrate his or her deep consideration for the guests. The matcha is then mixed with the hot water using a bamboo tea whisk. tea is ready. This bowl of tea is the expression of the host's deep intention to make the guests feel welcome. At a formal tea ceremony, a single tea bowl is used, which is passed from one guest to the next. There are also prescribed forms of action that guests must observe at tea gatherings. Each movement has its own significance. After receiving the bowl, it must be turned slightly before drinking from it. This is done to avoid placing one's mouth on the surface that is considered the front of the bowl. It's a gesture of respect for the host. After sipping the tea, each guest wipes the rim of the bowl out of consideration for the person who will drink from it next. Then the bowl is turned back, so that its front is facing the next guest as it's passed to them. Just as the host demonstrates solicitude for the guests, the actions of the guests express consideration for each other. This shared sense of respect and mutual warmth is what makes tea gatherings so special.
There's a spiritual element in the tea ceremony which is strongly based in the philosophy of Zen Buddhism. And there's an idealized concept of how participants at a tea ceremony are supposed to deport themselves, which is often expressed in Japanese in the phrase wake seijaku. The Japanese have a preference for proverbs which are written in 4 characters like that. Wa means harmony, ke is respect, sei is purity, and jaku is tranquility. First, the idea of harmony. This is both between the host and the guests, and also among the guests themselves. The idea being that everybody enjoys a peaceful atmosphere with an added sense of profundity. Then you have respect, the idea being that everyone is considerate of everybody else all the time. Purity, as we saw in the video just now, all of the guests wash their hands and rinse their mouths before entering the tea room. But it's not just about external purity. The idea is that you purify yourself spiritually as well for the tea gathering. And finally, tranquility. The idea is that everyone remains calm the whole time. For us Westerners, of course, the idea of sitting on your knees for several hours at a stretch may be a little bit taxing. Nevertheless, both the host and the guests at a tea ceremony keep these 4 principles in mind the whole time. It's the strong spiritual element which gives the tea ceremony its cultural significance. Next, we're going to take a look at how it developed and gained this level of depth.
The practice of drinking matcha spread in Japan in the 12th century. It began after the Zen Buddhist priest Eisai returned from China bringing seeds of the tea plant. It was during the 16th century that the ritual of tea drinking began to change. Prosperous merchants in the port city of Sakai started using opulent tea implements, and their tea gatherings became lavish affairs. The tea ceremony was also embraced by powerful figures such as Toyotomi Hideyoshi, the warlord who completed the unification of Japan. Hideyoshi had risen from humble origins. As a way to show off his authority, he created an extravagant tea room covered entirely in gold, in which he held tea gatherings. In those days, samurai warriors and merchants often used such gatherings for negotiations. Tea ceremonies were an opportunity for them to boast of their power by exhibiting the expensive tea implements they owned. In 1587, Hideyoshi held a huge tea gathering at Kitano in Kyoto. Tea ceremony aficionados from all over Japan attended, more than 800 people in all. Hideyoshi made his golden tea room the center of the event, displaying his precious tea implements. It was a demonstration of the power and prestige he had gained. But one tea master made a stand against all this opulence: Sen no Rikyu, the pivotal figure in the development of the tea ceremony in Japan. According to Rikyu, the essential aspect of the tea ceremony was to establish a sense of closeness between the host and the guests. Taian is a tea room that Rikyu designed. It's a vivid embodiment of the spirit that he brought to the tea ceremony. The doorway is just 67 centimeters high. To enter the room, guests have to crouch down and duck their heads through. Even people of high status had to adopt that posture of humility as they entered. Rikyu believed that a tea gathering should be a place where relations between people are unaffected by differences in rank and status. The interior is tiny, just big enough to fit 2 tatami mats, an area of 3.3 square meters. There is absolutely no ornamentation. In this austere space, the guests would find themselves squeezed together as they drank their tea. Rikyu believed that this kind of space fostered a deeper sense of human fellowship. The practice of drinking from the same tea bowl was another of Rikyu's innovations. Through the intermediary of the bowl, people are, in a sense, touching lips. This fosters an intimacy that transcends distinctions of status. Rikyu left this quote: "Let the tea be simple and your hospitality heartfelt." Tea without frills, tea served from the heart. This is the way to truly make your guests feel welcome. It's simple and yet very profound. That's what Rikyu sought in the tea ceremony. This spirit of the tea ceremony survived the onslaught of westernization that swept through Japan from the second half of the 19th century. In fact, it was adopted as an essential part of the education of young ladies. The practice of the tea ceremony, just as Rikyu envisioned it, still remains alive to this day. There is a saying about the tea ceremony: treasure every encounter. Each time you share a tea gathering with someone, it should be approached as a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity, so the moment should be savored. The host demonstrates the utmost consideration for the guests reciprocate. This principle encompasses the spirit of the tea ceremony. It has remained unchanged since the time of Rikyu.
It was in the city of Sakai near Osaka where the tea ceremony as we know it was born. Tea huts and tea gardens were artfully designed to create the illusion of being in some glade in the hills, despite the fact that you were actually in a bustling city. This kind of imaginary setting is expressed in Japanese by a term, shichu no sankyo, which translates as a mountain hermitage in the city. That idea is still very much alive today. Here in this office building in Ginza, a tea master and an architect collaborated to hold a tea gathering epitomizing the idea of the mountain hermitage in the city. However, to hold a tea gathering here in a place like this requires some thinking outside the box, as it were. For example, one of the critical elements of the tea ceremony is the selection of tea implements. For this contemporary tea gathering, implements were carefully chosen to add a distinctive flair appropriate to the very unusual setting of this literally once-in-a-lifetime experience.
The Nasu Ashino Stone Museum is in Tochigi Prefecture. One section of the complex includes a tea room built of stone recycled from an old warehouse. The walls are made of one kind of stone and the columns from another. This gives the tea room a contemporary feel. It's a space that's radically different from the traditional tea rooms built with walls of wood and packed mud. The tea room was designed by the renowned architect Kengo Kuma. Kuma says that creating tea rooms is having a major impact on his architecture. Tea rooms offer a unique opportunity for architectural experimentation, to examine the relationship between people and objects in a totally different way, and to explore how far a living space can be minimized. Kuma devised a radically new space for a tea gathering. He decided to set up his innovative tea room inside the entrance lobby of a Tokyo office building. To oversee the tea ceremony itself, Kuma collaborated with tea master Zen Soshu, 14th head of the Mushakoji Senkei School of Tea. Even though he comes from the centuries-old world of the tea ceremony, he's also open to new ideas. Preparations for the tea gathering began. Looking at the photographs of Kuma's planned tea room, what caught the tea master's eye was the tiny space it occupied. People can easily get used to spacious settings, and before long, they no longer feel a sense of the vastness. However, when you're squeezed into a tight space, it starts to feel much larger than it actually is. Zen Soshu picked out various tea implements to be used for the event. The selection is a crucial element in any tea gathering. Items must be chosen that harmonize with the character of the tea room and the guests at that event. The day of the tea gathering arrives. The materials for the tea room are delivered to the venue. A helium gas cylinder is wheeled in. What could it possibly have to do with the tea room? Kuma arrives at the site. He does a final check of his creation, inspecting it from every angle. Then the tea master arrives. This is the first time they've actually met in person. It's astonishing. It's a concept utterly unlike any tea room ever made. Kuma's unique creation has no pillars. It consists of a floating helium balloon overhead and see-through fabric. It's small, but once the host and guests are inside, it invites an intimate rapport. The tea ceremony begins. It's like being in the vastness of outer space. The boundaries are so vague, it feels so expansive. Your imagination is set free here. The implements chosen by the tea master are perfectly suited to this radical tea room envisioned by the world-renowned architect. The tea bowl is a ceramic piece made in Vienna. The tea caddy is by the French glass artist Émile Gallet. The green of the matcha can be seen through its translucent sides. In this, it echoes the appearance of Kuma's tea room. Usually a bamboo tea scoop is used, but this one is made of clear resin. It was made from the windscreen of a Second World War fighter plane. The rounded forms complement the bubble-like shape of the tea room. The implements also reflect the translucency of the space. While trying to work with the space, you're also critiquing it. That delicate balance, I think, that's really art. Yes, it's like a showdown between the two of us, isn't it? I think this very sophisticated form of one-upmanship is the essence of Japanese culture. Right. It's an intellectual battleground, the tea ceremony. A one-of-a-kind tea gathering that resulted from the meeting of the minds of a tea master and a master architect. Treasure each encounter as a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. This traditional maxim of the tea ceremony remains the guiding principle even at innovative tea ceremony events in contemporary Japan.
This tiny entrance to the tea room and the fact that you have to lower yourself in order to enter symbolizes Rikyu's idea that every participant in the tea ceremony should be considered as being of equal status. And in modern life too, the idea is that tea gatherings should be a place where people can connect without being hampered by differences in occupation and social status. People's busy lives give them less and less opportunities for encounters with other people with some significance. In English we say tea ceremony. In fact, the Japanese term is chakai, which just means a tea gathering, literally. And despite all the etiquette associated with it, the most important thing is that the host and the guests get together and enjoy each other's company in the moment. It's really as simple as that. And in order to get that idea across to future generations, there's a different kind of tea ceremony recently being held for children. We'll leave you with a look at that.
In the cooking classroom of this primary school, a group of children are busy making confections. Once a year, the first-year students put on a large-scale tea gathering. The confections to be served with the tea are being made by the children themselves. It's the day of the tea gathering. Each child has one parent or grandparent as a guest. You can tell the children are a little nervous. Finally, the event gets underway. First, the handmade confections are served. This is a way for the children to express their gratitude. They've put their hearts and souls into making these confections. Delicious! The tea bowls have been decorated by hand by the children, turning them into expressions of love and gratitude for their parents and grandparents. So much thought and care has gone into each individual tea bowl. It was wonderful. This tea gathering allows the children to feel the spirit of heartfelt hospitality. It's a once-in-a-lifetime encounter, because this very tea gathering can only be experienced once. Next time, our theme is soba noodles. We'll be looking at the origins of this famous dish, the way it's developed over the centuries, and its continuing popularity today.